Hello Adam's child, welcome to this week's sermon, which is the first part of a 2-video series going over all of the, for lack of a better term, creepy crawlies in the Fallout series. But in true Fallout fashion, very few of them are tiny anymore. Many of them are legitimate threats to any and everyone. There are many creatures to go over, but I will not include mirelurks or rad scorpions because they warrant their own videos because of the massive amount of lore behind them. So crank up the rads and make sure you have the entomologist perk as we go over the creepy crawlies of the Fallout series. We're going to start this off with hands down the most nightmarish of all the insect creatures in the Fallout games. The quick, the deadly, and the completely frustrating Cazadors that are only found in Fallout New Vegas. Cazadors are unmistakable with their large red and orange wings, red compound eyes, and blackish blue body. How they move is just as distinct as how they look. They move extremely quickly and erratically, which does make them easy to see in the distance, thank Adam, but also very hard to target when they notice you and decide to ruin your day. The real-world inspiration for the Cazador is no secret, as it is very clearly inspired by the tarantula hawk wasp, and this has been confirmed by New Vegas' lead designer, Josh Sawyer, who, after seeing a picture of this wasp, felt compelled to incorporate it into the game. When Josh was asked what his proudest contribution to the entire game was, it wasn't fleshed out factions, diverse quests, or deep characters, but rather Cazadors. Because he hates us. Cazadors are nearly a one-for-one representation of the tarantula hawk wasp, with the black and blue body, similar body shape, 4 red wings, and even small details like the curved antenna. It does have some notable differences though. It has large spikes on the thorax, and the large stinger on the end is fully retractable. Thankfully, one of the nightmare behaviors of the real-world wasp is toned down in Fallout, although it's not that much of a comfort, because Cazadors are still pretty awful. In the game, in addition to doing very strong damage, they will inject their targets with venom, which does an additional 8 points of damage for 30 seconds. Now, tarantula hawks in the real world work in a far more horrific way. They find a nice juicy tarantula or other large spider, sting it with a venom that paralyzes it, but doesn't kill it, and then drags it into a burrow. The female wasp will lay a single egg on the tarantula's abdomen, and when the egg hatches, the larva burrows its way into the tarantula, eating away at its insides until it grows to the point that it can pupate and emerge as a new winged demon. So we don't have it that bad, I guess. Cazadors strike quickly, so repeated hits and taking steady damage from the Cazador venom can wear down even a high-level courier rather quickly. In addition to being a rapid-striking venomous menace, Cazadors can fly short distances, meaning they can rush targets rapidly, and they tend to move erratically while in flight, or even just on the ground as well, making them very hard to hit. And as if that weren't all enough, they are always found in groups and never in isolation. To top that all off, Cazadors have some of the highest perception of any creatures in the game, including Deathclaws, so sneaking past them is almost impossible. So this really just means that you're never dealing with just one of these nightmare creatures, you're dealing with all of this BS, usually from multiple directions and several different targets, and is a big reason why Cazadors have their infamous reputation. Cazadors are actually a new predator to the Mojave. Their name means hunters in Spanish, and they appear to have a limited range since they are confirmed to only live in the Mojave, Zion Canyon, and the Big Mountain Research Facility. One would be forgiven for assuming that Cazadors simply mutated from the tarantula hawk wasp that is native to this part of the world, but that is not the case. Cazadors owe their existence to Dr. Boris, an off-kilter scientist that is a member of the think tank at Big Mountain. Dr. Boris is responsible for splicing the DNA of tarantula hawks to create Cazadors, which he insists happened on a Tuesday, perhaps in May of 2003. His memory, though, is pretty bad, so we can't be sure how true this is, because that would put their creation 74 years before the Great War, which would have made Dr. Boris very old by the time the Great War occurs. He also insists that they are docile, safe, sterile, and completely contained at Big Mountain. Literally, none of those things are true, which Boris refuses to believe, instead accusing the courier of being too stupid to understand the precise castration procedures they conduct on the experimental Cazadors. Apparently, the courier also doesn't understand the high-tech safety systems employed at Big Mountain to keep their primitive test subjects contained. If that's the case, Dr. Boris himself apparently doesn't understand any of this, because we know for a fact that Cazadors are not contained at Big Mountain. They were definitely not sterile, as we can find many nests and even young Cazadors in the wasteland. Like many experiments at the Big MT, they don't seem to serve much of a purpose. Dr. Boris does mention, though, that there were debates among the scientists about tarantulas, perhaps meaning that the scientists may have begun experimentation on the wasps out of fear or concern of tarantulas. The only evidence other than Dr. Boris's word that the Cazadors are from Big Mountain is a unique type of Cazador named Specimen 73, which is found in the Z14 Pepsine DNA splicing lab, and it has more health than any other type of Cazador. It's worth considering why this Specimen 73 is so much stronger than the versions we see elsewhere, though. Either Specimen 73 is more advanced, and a later Cazador creation developed at Big Mountain, so it would make sense that it's more powerful. Or normal Cazadors started off as strong and potent as Specimen 73, but after having left Big Mountain have become less powerful and potent as they spread through the wastes. The name of the lab, Z14 Pepsine, is once again a reference to spider-hunting wasps, since Pepsine is the family name of those kinds of wasps. There are many other Cazadors in the facilities locked behind closed doors, and they appear to be feeding on gore, much of which appears to be human, which is what the real-world wasp adults actually feed on. That is really all we know about their backstory and origin, which is actually a lot better than most creatures on this list, and there are several types of Cazadors, although their appearance doesn't really change, just their size. Starting with the weakest of all variants, young Cazadors are significantly smaller than all other kinds of Cazadors. They are roughly half as dangerous in nearly all metrics from a normal Cazador like health and damage, while also having lower perception and doing a bit less poison damage. The normal Cazador will be the measuring stick for all the others, with 200 HP, 70 melee damage, with 8 poison damage per second for 30 seconds, making it a very potent enemy, especially in groups. The giant Cazador is only found in Zion Canyon east of New Vegas, and predictably, they're much larger than the normal variant. Strange, I know. It also does more damage and has 75% more health than the normal Cazador, which is honestly just everything we never needed. Specimen 73 at Big Mountain is the next strongest variant, as it nearly doubles the health from giant Cazadors, which was already really high, although it doesn't do as much damage, around the same as a normal Cazador, and it has worse perception. It makes up for that though by being faster than any other variant, and all of this adds up to it being the second most dangerous variant in the game. The daddy of them all, or mommy, I'm not quite sure, which should come as no surprise, is the unique variant, the legendary Cazador. It is found at the Silver Peak mine, which has become a safe haven for Cazadors, and is larger, with double the health of a normal Cazador, and almost double the damage as well. The legendary Cazador is large and in charge, and in the close confines of the mine is impossible to evade, which makes it that much more difficult to fight in order to claim the prize at the end of the dungeon, which is an old Remnant's power armor helmet. Yay. We talked a bit about the real-world Tarantula Hawk and how the in-game Cazador is a smidge less horrific since it isn't dragging us into a burrow alive and paralyzed to lay an egg on us, but there are some other interesting things. It is known that the Tarantula Hawk has one of the most painful stings of any insect, being classified as a level 4 sting, which is the highest level on the Schmidt Sting Pain Index. Getting stung by a Cazador likely sucks absolute butt. I mean, just look at the size of that stinger, but we have no idea if it is as painful as its smaller real-world ancestor. Cazadors have developed a different nesting behavior too. What we see in game are clusters of conical nests, usually on the ground or walls, but never hanging upside down from the ceiling. This nest type seems to be a combination of mud dauber nests, which are clustered together, but it also has the conical shape of bald-faced hornets' nests, which are made of pulverized wood fibers, which kind of seems to match the texture on the Cazador nests. This means Cazadors have adopted behavior from other wasps, since tarantula hawks only build underground burrows, and maybe this is an indication of some of the genetic splicing and manipulation that took place at Big Mountain. Also, a very interesting aspect of tarantula hawks could explain why Cazadors are able to reproduce so easily, despite Dr. Boris's objections. Female tarantula hawks will lay a single egg on a paralyzed tarantula or large spider, but the sex of larvae will vary. If the egg had been fertilized by a male, the resulting larva will be female. But if the egg had not been fertilized at all, the larva will be male. Now isn't that interesting? That means that one lone female, or a female with a bunch of castrated males, could actually produce offspring that would perpetuate their fiendish little species. Eggs can be found on some normal Cazador bodies, which can be used to recover a pithy amount of HP. Really, it's not worth it, unless you're absolutely starving, since it's only 4 HP overall, and dosing for 3 rads. The eggs are only ever useful in the completion of the Bleed Me Dry quest, where the courier is asked by Red Lucy to recover various creature eggs so that she can hatch and raise the creatures as fighters in her underground fighting arena, the Thorn. The best way to survive Cazadors is just to avoid them altogether, but I know that's not always possible. Having high endurance or carrying antivenom, Datura antivenom, blood shield, or a snake bite tourniquet are all ways to counter the Cazador venom, but interestingly, not every strike will actually poison the player. Cazadors do not have any damage resistance, and their damage threshold is 0, meaning that they are unarmored. Low penetration, high damage weapons, or ammunition like hollow point rounds, will quickly eat away at their health. Targeting their wings has the chance of crippling them, which helps in landing subsequent attacks, because while they are still fast and twitchy on the ground, in flight they are just so much worse. Crippling their antenna will make them frenzy, like most other insects, and they will attack anything else nearby, even other Cazadors. Because of how fast and sudden their movement is, targeting these specific weaknesses is easiest done in VATS. Additionally, targeting their head won't cause extra damage, like most other creatures, so rather focus on the larger, easier to hit body parts, like the abdomen. So good luck next time you're in the Mojave, you're gonna need it in several locations that Cazadors call home. And when you see Dr. Boris, give him a nice punch in the brain for bringing this plague upon the world. Another flying menace was first introduced in Fallout 4, although thankfully they are nowhere near as butt-puckering as Cazadors. Bloodbugs are very aptly named because they are a bug that likes blood, and especially your blood. They look to be descended from mosquitoes, which is confirmed on an Enclave research facility chalkboard in Fallout 76, but have grown to be 2 to 3 feet in length, seemingly from radiation. Although they were first introduced in Fallout 4, they are also seen in Fallout 76, which takes place around 200 years before Fallout 4, meaning that either bloodbugs first mutated around West Virginia and spread from there, or that the mutation that causes them to grow extremely large is probabilistically likely enough to happen more than once. Bloodbugs are aggressive and predatory. They readily attack other animals, although they appear to coexist fine with other insects like radroaches, bloatflies, and stingwings. Bloodbugs are also cowardly. They often will fly away if they take too much damage. All other non-insect creatures appear to be fair game for them, and Brahmin appear to be their favorite target, likely because of how large and relatively defenseless they are. Bloodbugs appear to swarm targets, as they are usually found in groups, or at least in pairs, flying directly towards their target and stabbing with their large proboscis, aka the giant Capri Sun straw on their face, that they use to slurp up our life juice. In addition to inflicting damage by just stabbing, should they get the chance, they will plunge their proboscis into their target and quickly slurp up enough blood to enlarge their abdomen, turning it red, which is evidence of their successful attack. Their attacks will always irradiate the target as well, but the Bloodbug has a unique and seemingly counterintuitive special attack. If they have sucked up blood, sometimes they will regurgitate that blood right back at the target, usually the player, for a blinding attack that is heavily irradiated. Although we can assume that Bloodbugs use blood, much like mosquitoes, from which they are derived, perhaps the regurgitation attack can be a last-ditch effort to subdue a target, or allow the Bloodbug to evade a predator. This could make sense though. Normal mosquitoes will inject saliva into their prey to facilitate the flow of blood, so it's not a huge stretch that they would also evolve the ability to regurgitate everything as a defensive measure. There are several types of Bloodbugs, and starting with the weakest, we get the Bloodbug hatchlings. Significantly smaller than the normal Bloodbug, they also have very low health, almost non-existent damage resistance, and very low attack damage. However, their spray attack is just as deadly as other variants. All Bloodbugs, regardless of type, have very high perception at 10, which is the same as other extremely dangerous creatures like Deathclaws, and every single type is also completely immune to radiation damage. Honestly, that seems like a requirement for creatures that live in and around irradiated water their entire life, and to me, could be an indication that they owe their mutation to radiation. Just the normal run-of-the-mill Bloodbug is next with much more health, around 120, and slightly increased damage resistances at 15 for both physical and energy. They also do around 25 damage with their normal stab attack, making them not all that deadly, but due to their relatively quick attack speed and not so predictable flight characteristics, they can be a threat at lower levels, especially in large numbers. The Red Widow Bloodbug is the next strongest variant, spawning as the player character approaches level 20 in higher level areas like the Glowing Sea. It has double the health and damage resistance while doing an extra 10 damage, and is most noticeable because much of the body is a stark red color like the legs, head, and proboscis. I feel like the name Red Widow also confirms that all of these Bloodbugs that attack us are female, just like real mosquitoes, but that also leads me to ask the question, where are all the male Bloodbugs and what do they look like? Infected Bloodbugs can vary in appearance, but they have 100 more HP, 10 more damage resistance, and 10 more damage per hit, with one static spawn at the Greater Mass Blood Clinic. Seeing how mosquitoes are a very common vector for disease, it stands to reason that Bloodbugs would similarly spread diseases. Glowing Bloodbugs do a bit less damage than the infected, but they have more energy resistance and health. These glowing ones seem to have accumulated a lot of radioactive material somehow, perhaps a result of the kind of water that they pupated in, or the kinds of animals that they have snacked on. The most dangerous of all variants is the Vampiric Bloodbug, which starts to appear after level 42 and has the highest health, damage resistance, and attack damage, although they don't look all that dissimilar from your bog standard Bloodbug. It's also interesting that this one is called Vampiric, since all variants suck blood. But perhaps this means that this kind actually consumes the blood for sustenance, whereas the others just seek out blood in order to grow their eggs. There were a number of changes in Fallout 76, although Bloodbugs largely stay the same. The introduction of diseases as a mechanic means that getting bit, or in the case of Bloodbugs, just straight up stabbed, has a good chance of spreading a disease. They are also balanced differently, with a lot less HP and lower perception, but have almost the same exact hierarchy as in Fallout 4. One difference though is that now Vampiric Bloodbugs are no longer the top dog. Glowing Bloodbugs are the most lethal now. Like most creatures, Bloodbugs can be affected by the Scorched Plague, turning any of these variants we've talked of into a pinkish red Scorched Bloodbug. The Nuclear Winter game mode, which is no longer available, introduced 3 additional types and are, in ascending order, the Venomous Bloodbug, Virulent Bloodbug, and Deadly Bloodbug, the latter of which has more HP and does more damage than any variant in the game. Bloodbug bodies can be looted, yielding a proboscis, bloodbug meat, or irradiated blood, which can be components in several recipes and crafts, but nearly all of it is heavily irradiated. Although we never see them in-game, there was Fallout 4 concept art that showed the bloodbug larvae, and somehow they are even worse than the bloodbugs themselves. It would have been really great though to see these in-game among the random fauna that have started to fill the wasteland, especially in Fallout 76. The largest of the creatures in this whole list is the mighty fog crawler, which was first introduced in Adam's DLC, Fallout 4's Far Harbor. Fog crawlers are very large, around double the height of an adult human. They run on 6 legs with 2 large scythe-like claw arms, and they have a wicked-looking spiked head with 6 red eyes that tapers off to an aggressive point on either end. It's obvious that fog crawlers are related to or mutated from crustaceans, although there is no single one that is an obvious design inspiration. It has large tail fins that are common on things like shrimp and lobsters, has large forward-facing antennae similar to many kinds of shrimp, and has 10 legs with the 2 front ones being small with tiny claws, just like a lobster. The one attribute that may belong to a specific animal are the front claws that aren't an exact copy, but are certainly reminiscent of mantis shrimp claws. Similar to the bloodbug, fog crawlers were first introduced in Fallout 4, with a loading screen saying that fog crawlers mutated as the result of the radioactive fog on Mount Desert Island, on which Far Harbor is located. Old Longfellow will even mention that fog crawlers tend to stick to the parts of the island that have the densest fog. However, fog crawlers are also in Fallout 76, which takes place much earlier than Fallout 4, but seemingly within another kind of radioactive fog that was created by a destroyed and exploded Gek in Vault 94. So that seems to be a common theme here. In Appalachia, there are far fewer crustaceans that could have evolved into a fog crawler. They're mostly just limited to slightly different types of crawfish. But in any case, this still resulted in fog crawlers all the same. Fog crawlers are deceptively quick given their size, with no ranged attacks. But it can attack in 3 other ways: by slamming its head down onto the target, slicing with its serrated arms, and also jumping up and slamming into the ground for an area of effect attack, which has a staggering effect. They are well armored by their thick carapaces, have max perception, have heaps of health, and are immune to radiation and poison damage. Even just a basic fog crawler is a menace, with 750 HP, a damage resistance of 200, and an energy resistance of 150. For context, the basic Deathclaw has 200 less HP, 100 less damage resistance, but 100 more energy resistance. The melee damage is high, but not tremendously so at 75 points of damage, compared to the 60 or 120 damage a Deathclaw can do depending on the attack. The fog crawler makes up for this relatively modest damage by having an impressive rate of attack. Glowing fog crawlers are the next strongest, so unlike bloodbugs, where the glowing variant was one of the more powerful ones, the glowing fog crawler is one of the weaker ones. A beautiful green glow leaks out from the gaps in the chitin armor, and interestingly, 4 of the 6 eyes also seem to glow green, but the 2 largest eyes don't. Make of that what you will, but it kind of makes it seem like the smaller eyes may work differently, like perhaps being sensitive to other kinds of light. The glowing fog crawler has a healthy but not outrageous bump in all stats, and will start appearing around level 39 and deal additional radiation damage. Skulking fog crawlers start to show up at level 51, with 1 more point in perception and extra damage and energy resistances. The biggest stat change is the increase in health at an extra 400 hit points. But strangely, it loses around 30 damage in its attacks, with damage lower than the basic fog crawler. This variety looks really cool, with its orange coloring and stripes, which seems to be related to the so-called calico pattern some lobsters have, although this is much more uniform. At level 63, we start to see pale and diseased fog crawlers who have similar stats, and they almost look exactly the same. They both have very little color and the exact same stats, with 550 more health than skulking fog crawlers, an extra 50 for both energy and damage resistance, and the most damage per hit yet at 120. They also have another point in perception for an incredible total of 12. Although it seems like these variants are exactly the same, the disease type will inflict additional poison damage when attacking. The last variants depart the most stat-wise from all the others, and let's start with the incredible tank that is the Enraged Fog Crawler. Appearing after level 75, Enraged Fog Crawlers have a solid bump in damage and health from the pale and diseased kinds, which already had just insane health, but then the Enraged variant is given another perception point for a total of 13, and a mind-blowing damage resistance of 4,000. Yes, 1,000. For perspective, the pale and diseased variants we just talked about had 350. This means that using energy weapons is by far your best bet to start whittling away at their incredible 2,200 health, which is nearly 1,000 more than the highest level Deathclaw. Barring that, using a ballistic weapon that has high penetration is the next best option, but that may not be enough to kill it quickly. The enraged variant is green and is draped in netting and fishing tackle, so it's fairly distinguishable. But hey, maybe this is why it's enraged. It got stuck in a bunch of netting. There is one unique named fog crawler, Shipbreaker, who is an enraged fog crawler who has a long history of terrorizing the settlers of the island. Shipbreaker seems to hunt for sport, wrecking ships out at sea, and becoming such a menace that the potential companion, Old Longfellow, has sworn to take her down. Somehow she has mutated an ability to interfere with radio waves and can thereby be tracked down for any intrepid sole survivor. One special variant is the so-called ghostly fog crawler, which is the other variant with very different stats because it is only meant to appear during the visions in the fog quest, which is the initiation ritual quest for the children of Adam. These types of fog crawlers are not hostile, nor can they take damage, making it unclear if what we see during the quest is real or an apparition. In Fallout 76, there are many of the same types, although many stats are adjusted. One new variant is called the Noxious Fog Crawler, with dull gray coloring, and is more powerful than the Skulking, but less powerful than the Enraged. The Enraged no longer has a mind-numbing 4,000 damage resistance, and in all ways is weaker than the Glowing Fog Crawler, which is now the strongest variant that will be encountered in the wastes of Appalachia. Fog crawlers, of course, are susceptible to the Scorched Plague, changing it to a fleshy pink color, and there are two special variants that are only seen as part of events. The Prime Fog Crawler appears during the Primal Cuts event, with stats exactly the same as the Glowing Fog Crawlers, but the Alpha Fog Crawler that appears at the end of the Project Paradise event is a whole new level of crazy. The Alpha has an absolutely absurd 10,000 HP, although thankfully, no increase in damage resistance. Since fog crawlers are fast and have no ranged attack, they are best dealt with by crippling their legs, so a weapon with the Kneecapper legendary effect is very useful. This helps keep them at a safe distance, while you can wear down their health and punch through their thick armor. Interestingly, the fog crawler design wasn't specially made for Far Harbor. It follows one of the concepts for the Mirelurk Queen, this one to be exact. We've been talking about some hardcore creatures, so let's bring it down a notch to the humble little Firefly. One thing is, some of them aren't quite as little anymore. Some of them appear to have mutated post-war to be considerably larger, especially their abdomen, which is bioluminescent. Fireflies are not hostile, although some can be killed or otherwise harvested for both bioluminescent fluid or a firefly abdomen. Bioluminescent fluid can be collected to put into the Landview Lighthouse in order to attract a Mothman, or consumed for 1 rad and a meager quenching effect. Abdomens can be broken down to acid and nothing else, so fireflies are more set dressing and a way to enrich the world of Appalachia than anything else. A much smaller variant of firefly can be found in the mire, where they can't be targeted, killed, or collected. These fireflies aren't all that innocent though. They appear to be a larger version of the real-world Photinus pyralis, which is a species of firefly where the females attract firefly males from other species by mimicking their flash pattern. And when those males come in thinking that they've scored, the females chow down. Damn nature, you scary. One of the most successful insects the world over has survived the nuclear apocalypse, and they have grown big. Giant ants are quite prevalent throughout the entire series, although surprisingly they are not found in the first game. Fallout 2 introduced them. They are actually one of the first enemies that the player, the chosen one, will encounter in that Adam Damn tutorial, the Temple of Trials. They are a dark brown color, appear to be approximately a couple feet in length, but it's otherwise difficult to determine really anything more about them. They are one of the weakest creatures that can be encountered in the entire game, with far less HP and lower damage than even rad scorpions that are also low-level enemies. The only time they are a concern are in the earliest levels, like the tutorial, or in great numbers where they can swarm the chosen one. There are 2 variants in Fallout 2, the normal giant ant, which is the weakest variant, and the tough giant ant, which is exactly double the threat, but that's not really saying a lot. We see ants next in Fallout 3, having Skip Tactics and Brotherhood of Steel, and there are a lot of new variants and even additional background lore. Although ants in Fallout 2 were the most basic and low-level enemies, in Fallout 3, depending on the variant, they can either be just as weak or more of a threat. The Enclave in Fallout 3 have conducted some research into some of the post-war creatures, including giant ants, and have determined that the ants, at least in the Capital Wasteland, are a type of black carpenter ant. Vault 101 had also sent a number of scouting parties outside of the vault, and giant ants were one of the few creatures that they encountered. They had postulated that their increased size was most likely the result of radiation exposure, although there has not been confirmation of that in any of the games. They still work in a colony with a queen ant laying eggs, although they are now the length of a full-grown adult, roaming around scavenging and attacking any threats by approaching relatively slowly and biting with their giant mandibles. They seem quite strong, much like the real-world ants, since we can find large creature corpses like entire Brahmin down in their colonies, and they are happy to munch down on humans as well, shown by the bones strewn through the colonies. The normal giant ant has quite low attack, perception, and health, representing a threat only in numbers or at very low levels. Giant worker ants have a bit more health, perception, and melee damage, although it is still quite low, but things start to get dicey with the giant soldier ants. Giant soldier ants can scale up to level 6, where they have 5 times the health, 1 more perception, and over 3 times the damage as the giant worker ant. Giant ant queens are also so much more of a threat that she makes everyone else look laughable. The queens are several times larger than any ants or humans, and they have a ranged attack, which is some sort of acid spray, and a more damaging physical attack as well. They have much longer mandibles, a large undulating abdomen that is pumping out eggs, and interestingly, they have wings. Usually a potential queen will have wings, but upon becoming a queen, they will pull their own wings off, becoming wingless. It seems that specific behavior did not carry over for the giant ants. Queens have 1 more perception than soldier ants, but most impressively, they have 1,000 HP, which is 850 more than the strongest soldier ants. There are only 3 giant ant queens in the entire game, 1 at the Corvega factory, 1 in Shalebridge, and a special one in Marigold Station. The one in Marigold Station isn't any boring old queen though. She is a fire ant queen. Fire ants are not a natural mutation from radiation. They are the accidental creation of a wasteland scientist named Dr. Lesko. Lesko started with good intentions. Observing giant ants that he found around Grey Ditch, he wanted to find a way to return the ants to their pre-war size so that they would cease being a threat to wastelanders who are just trying to survive in a wasteland that already sucks even without giant ants. His experimentation used FEV. Where he got it is not clear at all, but it eventually led to him accidentally introducing the ability for ants to spray a flammable substance and then ignite it by sparking their mandibles together. This gives them a ranged attack that does initial damage with additional lingering fire damage over 8 seconds. Naturally, this also means fire ants are resistant to fire with 85% resistance, so leave your flame weapons at home. Fire ant workers are the weakest of the fire ants, no surprise there, and they have the same low stats as the giant ant, with the obvious addition of a fire attack as well as fire resistance. Fire ant soldiers are also the same stats, but we also get 2 new variants. Fire ant warriors are even stronger than soldiers with 75 more HP, higher perception, and more damage, but only appear at higher levels. The second new variant has the exact same stats as the warriors, but are called Fire Ant Nest Guardians and are only encountered in the Marigold Station nest where the queen is. Ironically, the Fire Ant Queen herself cannot breathe fire like the rest of them. She just has her acid spray attack, but there is cut content that would have shown flaming gobs of spit. So it seems like the developers at one point intended for her to have a fire attack. The Lone Wanderer can help Dr. Lesko, who is well aware of the fire ants, but doesn't seem as alarmed as us by their presence on the surface as they scurry around roasting any and everything they can, including some poor kids' parents. The The lone wanderer can either kill the fire ant queen to stop the propagation of this new species, or they do as Lesko wishes, which is to sneak down into the nest and kill all the nest guardians so that Lesko can apply his experimental mutagen so that future ants from the queen won't breathe fire any longer. Strangely, Dr. Lesko will claim that fire ants are radiation-free. However, they will drop ant meat upon their death that is indeed radioactive. So is the good doctor lying? There is one more variant that can be found in a colony in Shalebridge that is quite interesting as well. Mutated forager ants are much smaller than the normal giant ants, around the same size as a radroach, and most intriguing, they will not attack the player. The forager ants are under attack by a rival giant ant colony, and will be killed by them if the lone wanderer doesn't help. Finding and killing the intruder giant ant queen, and then aiding the friendly forager ants by stimpacking their eggs to ensure they grow quickly and bolster the ant population, is how you can ensure the survival of these friendly ants. Mutated forager ants are about as strong as the invader ants, that are much larger, which I found surprising. But likely owing to their smaller size, they're just not faring as well against the invaders. The best way to fight giant ants is to either target and cripple their legs, which will make them easy to outrun, or by targeting their antenna, which is a tactic that is employed by the Enclave field soldiers when they run into some. Ants can drop ant meat, fire ant nectar, or ant queen pheromones, which can be used to increase charisma, because people just can't resist the moans. Some of the concept art portrays the normal giant ants as being much larger than they are in game, around the size of a giant ant queen. Other concept art shows giant ant pupae, which would have been cared for by worker ants in a nursery, and apparently when the player would approach, they would have squirmed and squeaked, attracting the attention of other ants. The giant ants in general may be a reference to the 1954 sci-fi movie Them, which has ants that mutated from the fallout created by the atomic bomb tests in New Mexico. The quest associated with the fire ants is definitely a reference to the movie though, since the quest is called Those. Giant ants return in the following game, Fallout New Vegas, and strangely for New Vegas, the stats are largely the same. Giant ants and giant soldier ants can scale to a higher level, meaning they can be a bit beefier, but overall they're still low-level threats and have no damage resistance, and are quite slow and easy to outrun. Notable exceptions are the ants up at Nellis Air Force Base, where they've been feeding on a steady diet of explosives, all part of a balanced breakfast. If they are shot with energy weapons or explosives as part of the quest to help the boomers clear out their ant infestation, they will detonate with a mighty explosion that deals heaps of damage and can cripple limbs with ease. But hey, at least we got them, right? Fire ants are also in New Vegas, although we aren't sure how some ants in the Mojave came to possess this ability, perhaps evolving it naturally due to radiation. Since there is a precedent set from Fallout 3, that may mean that the mutation is relatively easy to replicate through natural processes. And they aren't the first creatures to get such an ability either, since fire geckos can also breathe fire. Once again, fire ants have the exact same stats as in Fallout 3, which is actually not the norm for creatures and weapons that are shared between the two games. Fire ants are the only ones with a queen that we can encounter, although this has had some changes. Being the only one in all of New Vegas, it resides in the Ant Mound just south of the Allied Technologies offices, not too far from New Vegas. The Ant Queen now does double the damage as her Fallout 3 counterparts as well. Another big difference is that she has less than half of the HP that she had before, but it kind of balances out because of her higher attack. Giant ants are found in various places across the Mojave, although they're usually first encountered early on near the Ivanpah racing track. Fallout 4 had no ants at all until the Nuka World DLC, where we are introduced to more ant types than everything we have discussed so far. The ants in Nuka World are large, much larger than in the real world, but some kinds are much, much smaller than any of the ants we have seen before. The annoying new addition, however, are the flying ants, which spawn regularly with and alongside their earthbound brethren, or sisterin more likely. Ants are regularly found close to nests. These colonies appear to be earthen nests that stand a few feet tall and are pretty recognizable. The small forager ant is the weakest of all these new variants, with a perception of 4, health of only 5, and damage of only 5 as well. They are quite literally completely ineffective. All ants have no damage or energy resistance and are completely immune to radiation, which seems to be a common theme for a lot of these creepy crawly creatures. Around level 20, small soldier ants will appear, which are distinct because they are a brownish red color. They have double the HP and deal much more damage at 15, but they are still quite weak, especially since most players start the Nuka World DLC at later levels. Small glowing ants have double the HP of the former, and a damage bump as well, but all of these small variants are not really anything to worry about, even though they do an additional bit of radiation damage. The glowing variant is black, with certain parts of their bodies glowing green, including their antenna, mandibles, and gaps in their chitin armor, and they will drop nuclear material and irradiated blood upon their death. Now we start to get into the real threats, with a slightly larger version of each kind of ant. Forager ants will start to appear at level 20. They now have 78 health, which is nearly 4 times the small glowing one, and they hit for 25 damage. Soldier ants are more aggressive with a good bump to both damage and HP, and the glowing ant is finally something that you need to take seriously, especially in groups with 180 HP and 40 damage. The biggest threats, however, are all the overgrown versions of these ants. Overgrown foragers have 150 health and do 40 damage, and start to spawn at level 30. Overgrown soldiers bump up the damage and health a bit, but the glowing ones are legitimately a threat with 250 HP and doing 75 damage per strike, which is on par with a standard fog crawler. Yowza! The overgrown ants appear to be a similar size to the ants in Fallout 2, and they have a jumping attack where they can spring at their target from several feet away, which is another thing we've never seen before. Their antennae also are not targetable in VATS, it's now all just part of their head, but crippling their head can cause them to stop attacking. In what is a first for the series, we get the flying ants that only attack in swarms. Their size is pretty small, they seem to correspond to the small ant variants, but they can be extra menacing due to their speed and ability to follow their targets anywhere. So there is no outrunning these guys. Flying ants are all immune to poison, and their overall health is a sum of each individual ant that makes up the swarm, with each ant having 10 HP, which means it generally takes just one bullet or strike to kill them. This really is the saving grace because they are quicker and harder to hit than the land-based ants, and that isn't all, these little suckers can hit hard. The normal flying ant swarm appears to be made up of winged forager ants and can hit for 100 damage. Flying soldier ants hit for 50 more damage and appear after level 45, and the flying glowing swarm will be encountered after level 60 and do a devastating 250 damage on top of some radiation damage. In the real world, winged ants are sexually mature male and female ants that will fly off to find another place to begin a colony when the conditions are right. So by taking out every ant swarm that you see, you are doing your part as the wasteland's best pest control. Flying ant swarms can also be knocked around or staggered in a way where the ants have to take some time to refocus their attack, especially with melee hits. Fallout 76 has the same variants introduced to the Nuka World except for all the flying varieties, with the same hierarchy as well, although they all now have at least some damage and energy resistance. Of course, like all the creatures that can be found in 76, there is a scorched variant that is pale and flesh colored, but its stats are the same as whatever variant it was before being infected. There are some additional ones though that were introduced for the Vault 94 raid that are more deadly than the other types in Nuka World. Venomous forager ants have an incredible 275 HP and hit for 55 damage. The venomous soldier ants are at an insane 400 HP, doing 10 more damage, and the venomous glowing ant beats them all, adding 50 more health and 5 damage. If you can somehow summon the imagination for this, the deadly ants are the most deadly variant of all. However, there is no deadly forager ant, only deadly glowing and soldier ants, and all of these deadly variants have incredibly high fire and cryo resistance, just in case you didn't feel like you were being challenged enough. It isn't that surprising that there are so many kinds of ant varieties, sizes, and even capabilities given how many ants and species of ants that are in the world, but it is interesting to think about their distribution. The largest ants are in Washington, D.C. and New Vegas, with smaller but still dangerous ants in Appalachia only a few decades after the war, and in Nuka World, a couple centuries after the war. Flying ants are unique to the Northeast, And it is obvious from Fallout 3 that the largest sized ants are very aggressive, since they can be seen invading a colony of smaller, more peaceful ants. Perhaps this is the eventual fate of the ants in Appalachia, that larger ant mutants are able to fight and outcompete the smaller ones over time. I can also imagine the ability to breathe fire would be very beneficial as well, yet fire ants in New Vegas are not as numerous as the normal giant ant. Ants must have a propensity for mutation, and perhaps a lot of this is inspired by the 50s sci-fi flick Them that I mentioned earlier. Although, I'm just going to pretend that they're actually inspired by the secret ant fighting missions from the first Red Alert. Fallout Tactics decided to up the WTF factor by introducing giant wasps that are apparently indigenous to the Midwest USA since they are only found there. Like nearly everything else here, they have mutated to be much larger in size, but they also have wicked spikes on the thorax and down the abdomen, as if they weren't jerks enough. Looking at the design, they seem to be inspired by yellow jackets. The specific pattern on the back and yellow stripes is a dead giveaway, but they have taken some liberties with things like the eyes and of course the huge frickin' spikes. Wasps don't have a lot of health, but they can hit fairly hard, especially for low-level characters. Shockingly, they're pretty slow and they're easy to outrun, and they appear to get along with other insects just fine, which is also really weird. They also always seem to be in groups of 2 or 3 and are very aggressive, immediately attacking anything that they detect. Their stingers can be used as a melee weapon, although it is not super common, and we can get a good look at the stinger, which looks like it has 3 points, and apparently has a paralysis effect, although the wasp it was taken from is long dead. They are one of the many creatures that can be controlled by the Beast Lords, so they are especially prevalent in and around locations like Quincy and Marden. There was meant to be a giant wasp enemy in the unreleased Fallout 3, codenamed Van Buren, but other than this image, we don't know anything else regarding them. The details about their coloration and shape don't match anything one for one, but they seem most similar to paper wasps that have more subdued colorings and skinnier bodies. Honeybees are amazing, and it is a small wonder that we've had to wait all the way to Fallout 76 to see them in-game. Bees are only seen around their hives, which are typically found in trees, but sometimes on buildings or other up and out of the way locations. They are never seen in isolation, but rather swarms that will stick around their hive unless the player loots some honey or honeycomb from the hive. At that point, they will aggressively swarm and attack the player, although not always. I couldn't get these ones to chase me at all, although their low HP and low damage don't make for much of a threat unless you are low level yourself, and generally the swarm will give up and go back after you've run far enough away from the hive. There is, however, one bee that is way more dangerous than a swarm, and oh boy is this thing crazy. Honeybeasts are very cleverly named, and it's not confirmed how a bee was able to grow to such large proportions. This is a bee that is larger than a Brahmin, with enormous mandibles that it uses to attack, and several small bee nests built on its back. It does have wings, but they are really worn down and unable to support its massive weight, so honeybeasts are no longer able to take to the skies. Even though they are slow, they can get help from bee swarms that are released from the hives on its back, and the damage it can deal is pretty impressive. Just the bog standard honeybeast has rather high perception, 450 health, and can hit for 30 damage. It has rather low damage, energy, fire, and cryo resistance, but it is immune to radiation damage and its poison resistance is decent. The putrefied honeybeast is really gross looking. It is a pale gray color with black wings, eyes, and mandibles, but most disturbing of all, the hives on the back ooze a thick black liquid. Given that honey is antimicrobial in nature, this makes me think that the honeybeast itself is diseased or something. It is a solid step above the normal honeybeast in terms of HP and damage, with everything else remaining the same. The raging honeybeast is another step above for both HP and damage, but is now gray with reddish pink highlights on its body and hives on its abdomen. The glowing honeybeast is probably my favorite. It is all black with glowing green eyes, and the hives glow as well. It has a very healthy 900 HP and does 75 damage per hit, while also getting a bump in nearly every damage resistance. The prime honeybeast, which is encountered during the Savage Divide Primal Cuts event, is just as strong as the glowing honeybeast as well. A rabid honeybeast has over 1,000 HP with damage over 100 as well, but ironically, insects are not able to contract rabies, unless radioactivity has also given us super rabies or something. Wow, that would suck. The frenzied honeybeast is next with an incredible 1,300 HP and 125 damage, followed by the poisonous honeybeast, which bumps up the HP and damage again. Giant honeybeasts are a step above the poisonous ones. And finally, the deadly honeybeast maxes out at 2,000 HP and 190 damage, with damage, energy, and cryo resistance being elevated to 200. Of course, there is also the scorched variant that looks really gross and fleshy looking, but one thing they all have in common is that their fire resistance is the lowest of all resistances. This means that using weapons that inflict fire damage is a good choice when going up against honeybeasts. It is common to find honey and honeycomb on dead honeybeasts, which are useful in crafting a number of recipes, but one unique item to them is royal jelly. Now, things are a little weird here, because there are two types of royal jelly. One from the honeybeast, which is a non-consumable and can only be broken down into glass and antiseptic? What? And another which is never found on honeybeasts and is consumable directly or can be used in recipes. To make matters even more confusing, both royal jellies look identical, being held in an old buff-out jar that has royal jelly written on it in marker. This is speculation, but perhaps the royal jelly is part of how honeybeasts are made, since in the real world, it is a substance produced by bees that is only fed to larvae when they are needing a new queen, since the jelly has special properties that induce growth of a larva into a queen bee. Honeybeasts don't appear to be queens, but a mutation could have caused some larvae to grow to gargantuan sizes when fed royal jelly, rather than a new queen bee. It would be cool if this is a new evolutionary tactic, that some of these bees have evolved to depend on a honeybeast that can protect them and move around as needed to collect nectar. This would mean that bees need a queen to continue producing eggs, as well as a honeybeast that the hives can be built on. And that is it for this list. If your favorite bug, arachnid, or whatever was not mentioned here, it will be coming in a future video. Tell me what your least favorite of all these creatures are and why it's the Cazador. What similar creatures would you like to see in future games, since there are just so many kinds of interesting insects and arachnids out there. Thank you for staying with me this far. Any and all support is always appreciated to grow Adam's Kingdom. I want to thank all my beautiful and absolutely glowing supporters on YouTube and Patreon, with a special welcome to new patron, Red Foreman. If you would like to join their ranks, there are links in the description and they will soon be voting for the next supporter request video. As usual, a huge thank you to my top tier patrons, Acrid B, Gardner Minshew Simp, Tessa Storm, Dommy Double, Tapey Papey, The Alt Vault, Juan Vader, Good Old Welshaw, Braden Daniel, Tyler Eaton, Owen Balzer, and 94, and Ballistic Banana. Adam is pleased. Take care of yourselves. You are part of Adam's great plan, and I will see you soon.